Hello. Today we'll be taking a look at how to enter self-employment income and expenses. Go to the search here, type in self-employed. You'll see that it does give us the option, but no option to jump to it. That's because we're on the tax homepage. And if we just go pick up where we left off or just anywhere inside the return, it's going to give us that option to jump to self-employed. You can also select it manually down here at the bottom. Might have to click something to get this list to show up. You can see right there, self-employment income and expenses. And we'll go ahead and say, yes, I did have that. And I work in, let's say, rideshare. That's for your Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, any form of passenger pickup. Yes, I work in rideshare driving. You can select one of these, none of these, all of these, doesn't matter. I started, so if you started in the year, then you would go ahead and put the date you started. That's relevant because it's going to find out what percentage or what part of the year's worth of expenses are applicable to the rideshare driving. I stopped if you're no longer doing it, or I didn't start or stop. And did you pay any W-2 employees for a rideshare driver? That's going to be highly uncommon. Same thing with this, very unlikely. This is none of these are going to apply to a rideshare driver, very uncommon situations. And this gives you a little bit of a summary of just everything we just entered. You can take a look at that. You don't need to mess with the business code. That's why it asked, are you in rideshare driving? Because it associates this business code with that. There are a whole list of business codes, but the software does a good job of picking the right one for you. And business name, this is typically going to be none. Business address, that's just going to be your home address. Typically not going to have an EIN as an Uber driver and not in a disaster or reservation. And cash accounting method, this has nothing to do with actual cash physical money. This has to do with the accounting method of I received the money within the calendar year or I spent the money within the calendar year. Therefore, it's going on that calendar year's tax return. Looks good. If you use Square for, again, for a rideshare driver, this is pretty uncommon. You're usually not processing any kind of payments through Square, but plenty of small businesses do. So you might want to go ahead and import some of that info. And Uber, Lyft, you can see that it gives you some options and you can link it up with that. But let's just go ahead and continue for today. And then how is the income reported? So Uber is typically going to give you a 1099K if you're within past the threshold, or a 1099 NEC. And sometimes you might even get both. If you get both have to be reported on the tax return. 1099K is going to be for your standard payments for driving, and then they'll sometimes issue a 1099 NEC in the case of promotional stuff or other kinds of payments. And just to not fill all that out, we'll just say we're done with that. And you can connect if you have a specific business account, it might be helpful to connect to your account, but let's just type in our expenses, ourself. And you can see here, it gives us a list of categories that it thinks might apply. So yeah, supplies, vehicle. You don't need to do car and equipment rental if you are not actually renting your vehicle. This is still very uncommon. Other miscellaneous expenses, this would be your cell phone, meals 50%. This would be while you're driving. And you can see here, there's multiple pages of a handful of other expenses. Most of those are not going to apply, but you can look through and see if there's anything that does apply. And if there's something that doesn't fit neatly into a category, you can always use that miscellaneous category. Okay, and now it's just prompting us for things that we didn't select that it thinks we might. Business license, payroll. This is very uncommon for an Uber driver. I don't know why the software would prompt that. All of these expenses are extremely straightforward. All you have to do is click the little pencil, communications, cell phone. You might want to be more specific than that, maybe put a carrier or something like that. And the amount that is attributable to business use times the number of months that you were using it for business. So if I don't have another job and this was my primary job, I could easily make it fly that I need 100% of my cell phone bill goes to my Uber driving. So let's say I'm paying $100 a month for my cell phone bill and I did it the entire year. That would be $1,200. That's the simplest form of math. Now, of course, a lot of disclaimers there. There is a calculation that needs to be done if it's anything other than that very straightforward scenario. Supplies, meals. So again, those are all very straightforward and act exactly the same way. You just put in a description and the dollar amount. And if you have more than one item, you can do add another row for that category and then put in as many expenses as you want. Vehicle is the only one that operates a little bit differently. So let's take a look at that. We'll just go ahead and say car. And that's typically going to be an auto under 6,000, a light truck, van, SUV under 6,000. You might occasionally see a truck or van over 6,000 or a heavy SUV over 6,000. And of course, this is for your truckers, the heavy truck over 14,000. But for now, let's just go ahead and say auto. And let's just say I was using this all the way back since 2020. I've had this vehicle and I own this vehicle. It's going to be the most common. Yes, it was available for personal use. Do you have another vehicle? No, I don't. That's going to be most people. And yes, I track the miles. No rule against tracking after the fact in case you want to go back and do a log. Now, in the case of Uber and Lyft, they will give you the online miles recorded anytime you had the app on. I've found that they are very good about that. There are some food delivery services that do not do that, but there are lots of apps that do it. So this top line is how many total miles the vehicle was driven. So let's say I didn't track my personal miles and Uber told me I drove 37,000 miles with them. So I would just go ahead and put in 37,000 twice. And that lets them know that I didn't track the personal miles. I just kept tracking business miles, which is totally not a big deal. That's very common because it doesn't actually matter. Have you ever taken the standard mileage deduction? Yes, I have. If you have not taken the standard mileage deduction and you've done the actual expenses, you are now obligated to do that for the rest of the lifespan of the vehicle. So you cannot go back to taking the standard mileage deduction once you've done actual expenses. And you'll see this is the deduction it's giving me $24,000 of less taxable income with my mileage deduction from 37,000 miles. Yes, I'll take it. And again, once you enter the actual expenses, you can do that. And it might be a benefit to you on a given year, but typically in the long run, that's actually going to be a big disadvantage. Now, regardless of which method you chose, whether it's the actual expenses or the standard deduction, you do have some additional expenses here that you can tack on top of that. And there we go. Okay. And we'll go ahead and say, no, I don't have another vehicle for this work. Let's go ahead and add in some income. I'm just going to, just so that you can see how this is working, we'll say cash for, say, $50,000. Okay. And again, this is just for demonstration purposes. You should have a form if you're an Uber driver. But if you don't, that's always an acceptable way to do the accounting. Then you can see we've got our expenses up here, we've got our income down here, and it's taken it away. So income for this work, 50,000, our expenses, and that leaves us with our taxable income. And that is important because that is the distinction between a self-employed person versus a W-2 employee. You are paying on your net earnings. So after your expenses, this is your net earnings that becomes your taxable income, but you are paying a higher tax rate. You're paying the regular, whatever the tax rate is that everybody else pays, plus an additional, it's like 15.4, let's just call it 15% self-employment tax on top of the regular tax rate. All right, and there we go. Final wrap up questions. How much of the rideshare took place within the United States? That's typically going to be all of it. This doesn't actually impact you. Was any of this rideshare for a former employer? Yes, no, some of it. This is really trying to track employers who are switching their W-2 employees incorrectly over to independent contractors. But let's go ahead and say no. And do you have any deductions you'll claim anywhere else? That's called double dipping. So no, you don't want to double dip on anything. And run my free check. Great, we've got a low audit risk. Then it gives you some things. Don't guesstimate. You can see these round numbers. And that's true. You don't want to guesstimate. That clearly indicates that it is a guesstimate, not an actual number, which does bring some additional scrutiny to your return. Could bring additional scrutiny. And no. All right. And that's how you do it. That is how you enter a self employment income and expenses within TurboTax. Thank you. Have a great day.